So I want you to imagine just for a second a perfectly functioning operating system.
Okay, I'm with you.
Like it is doing exactly what it was designed to do, running smoothly, every line of code executing its intended purpose. Every single file is right where it should be.
Sounds ideal.
Right. But then an exploit is found. The system gets hijacked by malware.
Oh, man. The worst.
Exactly. And suddenly, you aren't just dealing with a bad user experience or like a temporary glitch. The entire core architecture has been corrupted.
Yeah, it's fundamentally turned against its original design.
Right. To serve this malicious, unauthorized user. The underlying code hasn't just paused, it's been weaponized.
That is a fascinating way to frame it, because the hardware is technically intact, but the operating logic has been completely replaced by a hostile takeover.
You are no longer the administrator of your own system.
Right.
And when a hostile takeover of that magnitude happens, I mean, you can't just install a minor patch.
No, a patch won't do it.
You don't just reboot it, you need the ultimate system restore. You need a complete rewrite from the original developer. You have to strip out the malicious code down to the root directory.
Which is exactly what we are looking at today.
Yes. Because when we look at the concept of oppression today, we have to start by understanding it isn't just a bad situation in human history, it's that structural corruption. And to understand how that cosmic system restore actually works, we are pulling from a really massive stack of sources for this deep dive today.
There's so much incredible material to get through.
There really is. We are anchored by Chris R. Velazquez's extensive historical and theological essay, Redemption, Bondage and Oppression Israel Under Slavery in Egypt. And we've also got a series of these really intricate visual timelines that map out the biblical narrative.
The timelines were incredibly helpful for visualizing this.
They are. So our mission today is to extract the exact anatomy of systemic oppression, the precise mechanics of this divine rescue, and figure out why this specific ancient story from the book of Exodus remains the ultimate blueprint for human freedom.
It really is the blueprint. But to even begin mapping that out, we have to define the environment where this malware first takes total control.
Right, the setting.
Yeah, and in the context of our sources, that environment is Egypt. But you have to strip away the modern geographical associations here.
Like, we aren't just talking about a place on a map.
Exactly. In this ancient narrative, Egypt operates as the ultimate symbol of human bondage. It is the archetype of that corrupted system you were just talking about.
So how does the original design factor in?
Well, according to the foundational Genesis narrative, human beings are made in the very image of God. They are designed to reflect divine authority and creativity.
That's the flawless operating system.
Yes. But in Egypt, that image is violently suppressed. Humans are reduced to mere labor units, just cogs in an imperial machine.
Wow.
And simultaneously, human rulers, specifically Pharaoh, demand the kind of absolute worship and allegiance that only the original developer deserves.
The creator.
Right, Pharaoh claims ultimate authority.
That sets up a truly terrifying dynamic. I mean, we are talking about a civilization that has essentially institutionalized the corruption of human identity.
Institutionalize is the perfect word for it.
But how do we actually get there? Because if we look at the historical data mapping this out in the timelines, the Israelites didn't arrive in Egypt in chains.
No, they didn't.
They were actually invited guests. So how does a family of honored guests who were welcomed into a country degenerate into a brutalized, enslaved workforce?
The descent is calculated, it is highly strategic, and it reveals a lot about the psychology of power.
Break that down for us.
So the historical roots go back to a covenant, a binding promise given to an ancestor named Abraham.
Promising land, offspring, a blessing for the world.
Exactly. And fast forward a few generations, and this massive famine hits the ancient Near East. Abraham's descendants migrate to Egypt simply to survive the famine.
Right, because Joseph was there.
Yes, one of their own, Joseph, had brilliantly managed Egypt's agricultural reserves during this crisis. So the Egyptian state was deeply grateful to him.
They owed him their survival.
They did. So the Israelites were granted prime real estate in a region called Goshen. They were totally safe.
But political memory is notoriously fragile.
Oh, incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
Our sources isolate a massive historical rupture in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. It's a complete shift in regimes.
This is the part that gives me chills.
A new king arises over Egypt, and the text explicitly notes that he did not know Joseph.
Wait, let me stop you there. Because did not know Joseph, that isn't just a guy failing a history test.
No, not at all.
That is the deliberate erasure of political memory. The covenant benevolence, the gratitude for saving the nation from starvation, All of it is just wiped from the hard drive.
It is a total rewrite of national history to serve a new political agenda. The hospitality that was initially extended to this vulnerable immigrant family just curdles into suspicion.
And the essay shows us the exact psychological progression of that suspicion, right?
It does. The new Pharaoh looks at this minority population, sees that they are growing in number, and frames them as a fifth column.
A security threat.
Exactly. He essentially argues that if a war breaks out, these people will join our enemies and fight against us.
Yeah.
So suspicion turns into demographic panic.
And then that panic is codified into national policy, which, completely destroys the tired cliche we often use to describe systemic evil.
You mean the boiling frog analogy?
Oh, yeah. The boiling frog analogy where the heat just gets turned up slowly until you're cooked, that just feels way too passive for what is actually happening here.
I agree.
When you look at the timelines provided in our sources, it looks much more like a predatory loan.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
It's highly active, it's highly strategic. First, they offer you a manageable interest rate, right? Forced labor.
Just a tax paid in sweat.
Exactly. They draft the Israelites into building these supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. It's oppressive, sure, but it's framed as a national duty.
Right, you're just contributing to the state.
But when that doesn't break their spirit and the population keeps growing, the empire realizes the principal on this loan is ballooning. So they just change the terms overnight.
And the strategy pivots from economic exploitation to absolute demographic annihilation.
It escalates so quickly.
It does. The forced labor is designed to gain free infrastructure while simultaneously breaking their physical capacity to reproduce.
Just working them to death.
Exactly. And when that fails, the empire escalates to state-sponsored infanticide. The command is issued to murder every newborn Hebrew boy.
Throwing them into the Nile River.
Yes.
Which is such a horrific detail, but it's also an incredibly calculated move by the state. I mean, you kill the males to eliminate any future military uprising, but you keep the females alive to eventually assimilate them into the Egyptian population.
You effectively erase the Israelite identity within a single generation. You are dismantling the people from the inside out.
It's just a terrifyingly efficient system of death.
It is airtight. But in the midst of this inescapable machinery, the historical record introduces the very first fracture in Pharaoh's system.
And it doesn't come from where you would expect.
Not at all. It doesn't come from a neighboring army. It comes from two women, Shiphrah and Puah, the Hebrew midwives.
The sources highlight this as the Bible's first recorded act of civil disobedience.
It's remarkable.
It really is. Pharaoh directly commands them to murder the boys as they are born, and these two women simply look the most powerful man on earth in the eye and refuse.
You have to consider the immense courage that requires. Pharaoh, in the ancient Egyptian worldview, wasn't just a political dictator. He was considered a god.
Right, the literal embodiment of Horus on earth.
Yes, a guarantor of cosmic order. So to defy him was to invite the wrath of the state and the gods.
But the text provides their exact motivation.
It says they feared God.
Which is such a monumental concept.
It changes everything. In a world where the state claims ultimate authority over life and death, Shiphrah and Puah introduced this radical idea that there is a higher jurisdiction.
Their reverence for the Creator completely invalidates the imperial command.
Exactly. They recognize that human life bears the image of God, and therefore it cannot be discarded by a tyrant.
They recognize the malware for what it is, and they just refuse to execute the code.
That's exactly it.
But, as inspiring as that resistance is, it is incredibly localized. I mean, two brave midwives cannot dismantle the military and economic infrastructure of an entire empire.
No, the systemic oppression is way too entrenched at this point.
Right. The Israelites are groaning under the weight of this slavery, just crying out for relief. And that brings us to this really dense theological sequence in Exodus chapter 2.
Yes, the four verbs.
Right. The essay we are pulling from isolates 4 specific verbs used to describe the divine response. It says, God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant. God saw the people, and God knew.
Heard, remembered, saw, knew.
Now, in our modern vernacular, those sound like very passive, emotional states, like, I see your pain, I feel bad for you.
Empathy, essentially.
Exactly. But in ancient biblical theology, these are verbs of aggressive, impending action, right?
Absolutely. And I want to challenge the word remembers specifically. Because from a human perspective, remembering implies a period of forgetting.
Yeah, it sounds like God got distracted running the rest of the universe, suddenly checked his calendar, looked down at Egypt and said, oh no, I left the Israelites down there for 4 centuries.
Right. Oops.
Exactly. So how does remembering function here if God is supposed to be omniscient?
It is a critical distinction to make.
Mm.
In the context of ancient covenant language, remembering has nothing to do with memory retrieval.
Okay.
It has everything to do with legal and relational obligation. When God remembers his covenant with Abraham, it means he is actively mobilizing to fulfill his promises.
Ah, so it is the activation sequence for the rescue operation.
Exactly. He isn't recalling a forgotten fact. He is stepping into human history to enforce a vow.
Okay, but that raises an enormous red flag that I think any listener would spot immediately.
Let's hear it.
If God is stepping in now to enforce the vow, why the massive delay?
It's the classic question.
Right, because Genesis 15 is explicitly clear. God tells Abraham centuries earlier that his descendants will be oppressed in a foreign land for 400 years.
He did.
God pre-announced the malware, so if he had the power to stop it, doesn't waiting 4 centuries make God somewhat complicit in the trauma?
The sources address this tension head-on because it is the fundamental question of theodicy, the problem of evil.
And what do they say?
The text posits that God's absolute sovereignty over human history overrules human evil, but it does not morally approve of it. The oppression wasn't an accident that caught God off guard.
It was factored in.
Yes, it was factored into the grand architecture of redemption. And the reason for the delay is tied directly to the nature of the rescue.
Walk me through that. Why does the nature of the rescue require 400 years of agony?
Because redemption, in its purest biblical definition, is the sovereign rescue of those who are completely, utterly incapable of freeing themselves.
Okay.
Imagine if the Israelites had staged a successful slave revolt in year 10 of their captivity. They forged weapons, organized a militia, overthrew the Egyptian guards.
That would be an amazing story.
It'd be a glorious story of human triumph, a testament to human resilience, but it would just be politics.
Ah, I see.
The entire theological purpose of the Exodus, the reason it becomes the foundation for all subsequent biblical thought, is to demonstrate that ultimate salvation must descend from the outside.
So God waits until the situation is mathematically impossible.
Exactly. The people are stripped of all resources, all weapons, and all political power. They are completely trapped.
So when deliverance finally arrives, there is zero ambiguity about who the Redeemer actually is.
The extremity of the bondage provides the canvas for the sheer magnitude of the rescue.
The system has to be completely unhackable from the inside before the external developer steps in.
That is a perfect way to summarize it.
And to bridge that gap between the external God and the enslaved people, a mediator is required.
Enter Moses.
Right, Moses. And Moses is such a brilliant paradoxical choice for this mission. I mean, he is born a Hebrew slave, instantly sentenced to death by the state's infanticide laws.
Yes, he should have died in the Nile.
But through a series of wild events, he is rescued from the Nile by Pharaoh's own daughter.
The irony is incredible.
He grows up in the palace, he eats the oppressor's food, learns the oppressor's military tactics, yet deep down he identifies with the slaves outside the walls.
He is a man caught between two worlds, completely unmoored. He attempts his own version of a slave revolt by killing an Egyptian taskmaster.
And fails miserably.
Completely. He flees into the desert and becomes a fugitive shepherd for 40 years.
Talk about a delay.
Right. And it is there, in complete obscurity, far away from the halls of power, that the divine initiative makes contact at the burning bush.
And the conversation at the burning bush is fascinating because God formally introduces himself. He gives Moses his name, I am, WHO, I am.
That name, Yahweh, is a declaration of uncreated, self-existent reality.
Think about it in contrast to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's power is entirely contingent.
Yes.
It relies on chariots, slave labor, grain silos, political terror. If you take away his army, Pharaoh is nothing.
But God declares, I am. His existence relies on nothing outside of himself.
Yeah.
And this self-existent God tells Moses, I have come down to deliver them.
That phrasing is crucial. God doesn't say, I am sending you to deliver them. He says, I have come down to do it.
You're just holding the clipboard.
Exactly. Moses is the indispensable yet completely temporary human instrument of a purely divine rescue.
Which launches us into the actual confrontation.
Right. Moses walks back into Egypt, stands before the most powerful man on earth, and we enter the narrative of the 10 plagues. Now, if you grew up hearing this story, you probably visualize the plagues as just a weird, random assortment of natural disasters.
Frogs in the bed, locusts eating the crops.
A really bad hailstorm, designed to just annoy Pharaoh into submission.
Right.
But the analysis provided in our sources reveals something much more profound. This wasn't a series of natural disasters. It was a calculated cosmic war.
You have to view the plagues through the lens of ancient Egyptian theology.
Because they were a very spiritual civilization.
Highly spiritualized.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was overseen by a complex pantheon of gods. The essay details how the plagues were highly specific, surgical strikes designed to systematically deconstruct these false deities.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. It's exactly like a targeted takedown of a corporation's key infrastructure.
Tell me more about that.
Well, if you want to cripple a modern tech empire, you don't just throw rocks at their headquarters. You cut the fiber optic cables. You poison the DNS servers. You freeze their financial assets. God is shutting down Egypt's servers one by one to prove they are running on counterfeit code.
That analogy holds up perfectly when you examine the targets.
Give us some examples.
Well, the Egyptian economy was entirely dependent on the Nile River, which they worshipped as the god Happy, the bringer of life.
So what does the first plague do?
The first plague turns the Nile into blood. God takes the source of their life and turns it into a river of death, proving Happy is powerless.
It's a direct attack.
Exactly. They worship Hathor and Apis, gods represented by livestock, so God sends a plague that wipes out the herds.
Striking at their economy and their theology simultaneously.
They worshipped Ra, the supreme sun god.
Yeah.
God drops a thick, suffocating darkness over the entire empire for 3 days. Ra is completely blacked out.
Wow. And the ultimate target is Pharaoh himself, right?
Yes, because Pharaoh's primary job wasn't just administrative. He was the guarantor of a concept called Mot.
Mot, which means what?
It translates to cosmic order, truth, and balance. The plagues are God proving to the Egyptian people that Pharaoh doesn't bring order. His oppressive policies are actually the source of chaos.
God is exposing the absolute impotence of the systems they trusted in.
Exactly.
But, exploring these plagues forces us to confront a really deep tension. The text insists that redemption involves devastating judgment.
Yes, that does.
And modern listeners, myself included, often recoil at that. We love the concept of God rescuing the oppressed. But the blood, the pestilence, the death of the firstborn, we want to filter that out.
We want a gentle, diplomatic rescue.
We do. We want the rescue without the retribution.
It is deeply uncomfortable for the modern mind, but Volatus's essay argues that you cannot separate the two.
Why?
Because if God does not judge evil, if he does not deal decisively, structurally, and physically with Pharaoh's cruelty and the Egyptian war machine, he cannot actually save the oppressed from it.
You can't have one without the other.
Think about the reality of a hostage situation. You cannot secure the release of the captives by merely sending a polite letter to the hostage takers.
Right. Please let them go.
It doesn't work. The captor's power must be broken. The judgment of Egypt isn't some embarrassing, archaic add-on to the story. It is the necessary, unavoidable flip side of the redemption coin.
God actively overthrows the oppressor because the oppressor refuses to yield to the authority of the Creator.
Precisely.
Which brings the entire conflict to its terrifying climax. The 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, and the institution of the Passover in Exodus 12.
This is a crucial moment.
It is the exact mechanism of how God saves, and it completely bypasses our modern ideas of fairness or moral high ground.
The mechanics of the Passover are essential to understand the rest of the biblical narrative. God announces that judgment is coming upon the entire land of Egypt, but he provides a highly specific way of escape for Israel.
What are they instructed to do?
They're instructed to take a lamb without blemish, slaughter it, and paint its blood on the doorposts and lintels of their homes.
Wait, let's drill down into the mechanism here. Because to a modern ear, painting blood on a door sounds like primitive magic.
It does.
It sounds like a superstitious word to keep away evil spirits. How did this actually function in the ancient mind? How does blood equal safety?
It is not magic. It is what the sources call covenantally ordered substitution.
Covenantally ordered substitution.
Right. In the biblical framework, sin and rebellion demand a cost. The judgment of death is passing through the land. The blood on the doorpost is a visible, tangible declaration that death has already visited this house.
Ah, I see.
The lamb died so the firstborn could live. The judgment of God doesn't just ignore the house, it passes over it because the cost has already been paid by a substitute.
That completely shatters the idea that the Israelites survived simply because they were the quote-unquote good guys.
Absolutely. They weren't saved by their moral purity.
Right. If an Israelite decided the blood ritual was silly and just locked his door instead, the judgment would have entered.
Without a doubt.
They were saved solely because they took shelter under the blood of a substitute. Life is preserved through death.
And that introduces one of the most vital principles we can extract from this deep dive.
Mm.
True redemption is extraordinarily costly.
It is the death knell for sentimental religion.
Say more about that.
Well, there's this incredibly popular modern idea that God is just a cosmic grandfather who waves a magic wand, ignores the demands of justice, and just makes everything okay.
Right, cheap grace.
Exactly. But the Passover insists that rescue is never cheap. The chains aren't just magically unlocked. They are broken by paying an ultimate price. Israel doesn't leave Egypt as a group of lucky, self-emancipated refugees.
No, they leave as a blood-bought people. Their entire identity is fundamentally rewired by that night.
But as the timelines show, leaving the geographical borders of Egypt is only half the battle.
It's just the beginning.
Right. They march out, laden with the wealth of the Egyptians, but almost immediately, the political memory of the empire shifts again.
Pharaoh wakes up, realizes his entire free workforce just walked out the door, and his pride overrides his trauma.
He mobilized the greatest military machine in the ancient world, hundreds of chariots, and chases them down.
Which leads to the trap at the Red Sea in Exodus 14.
The Israelites are completely pinned, uncrossable water in front of them, an enraged imperial army bearing down on them from behind. It is a literal topographical dead end.
And it is at this exact moment of maximum terror that the dual nature of God's action becomes undeniably clear.
What happens?
Well, the people are panicking, turning on Moses, asking if he brought them to the desert to die. And Moses delivers one of the most counterintuitive commands in military history.
What does he say?
Exodus 14, verses 13 and 14. Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent.
You have only to be silent, or as some translations say, be still.
Yes.
Imagine telling a crowd of terrified civilians to just stand still while an armored cavalry charges at them.
It's absurd from a human perspective.
It completely reinforces the principle we discussed earlier. They cannot contribute to their own rescue. God parts the waters, slicing a dry path right through the sea. The Israelites walk through.
But then the Egyptian army foolishly pursued them into that same corridor.
And this is where we see the fusion of rescue and retribution.
Exactly. The waters do not act the same way for both groups.
Right. For the redeemed Israelites, the walls of water are an instrument of salvation, a pathway to new life.
But the moment the oppressors step into the same space, those exact same waters collapse. The waters of salvation become the waters of judgment.
There is an incredible, dark irony there. Decades earlier, Pharaoh tried to destroy the Hebrew people by drowning their boys in the waters of the Nile.
The exact same method.
Now, God uses the waters of the Red Sea to completely obliterate Pharaoh's army. The mechanism that saves the oppressed is the exact mechanism that destroys the oppressor. It is absolute justice.
It is.
But here is a major pivot point in our deep dive. The Israelites are safe on the other side. They sing a song of victory. But what is the actual goal of this freedom?
That's the real question.
If you ask most people today what freedom is, they will describe it negatively.
Like the absence of restrictions.
Exactly. It's no one telling me what to do. It's running away from the bad thing.
Yeah.
But the sources we are analyzing argue that biblical freedom isn't just running away from something, it is walking towards something.
If you track the dialogue between God and Pharaoh throughout the plagues, God's demand is never, let my people go so they can wander the desert and discover their authentic selves.
Right.
The demand, repeated relentlessly, is, let my people go that they may serve me.
That they may serve me. That completely flips our modern libertarian definition of freedom on its head.
It really does.
God doesn't lead them out of Egypt just to drop them in the desert as autonomous individuals. In Exodus 19, he brings them directly to Mount Sinai to give them the law.
Because the true nature of redemption in this narrative is not the removal of authority, it is the transfer of allegiance.
Wow.
They are being severed from a tyrannical, abusive master Pharaoh in order to be yoked to a benevolent, life-giving King Yahweh.
So freedom without obedience isn't actually freedom, it's just chaos.
Exactly.
If you take 2 million people whose entire psychological makeup has been formed by the trauma and brutality of slavery, and you just dump them in a desert with no rules, no social structure, and no allegiance, They'll destroy each other.
They'll just build a new Egypt in the sand.
So God gives them the law at Sinai to give them a vocation. The essay calls them a missional priestly nation.
They are tasked with mediating the reality of God to the rest of the world. The laws given at Sinai laws concerning economic justice, the protection of immigrants, and the vulnerable agricultural practices and exclusive worship are designed to create a counterculture.
They are supposed to be a living, breathing exhibition of what human flourishing looks like.
Right. When a society actually operates under the original operating system, under the rule of the Creator.
Okay, so we've established the historical mechanics, the descent into oppression, the cries in the dark, the mediator at the bush, the cosmic war of the plagues, the bloody doorposts of the Passover, the collapse of the Red Sea, and the transfer of allegiance at Sinai.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But the deep dive doesn't stop in the sands of the ancient Near East. The timelines we are analyzing do something extraordinary here.
They pull the lens back.
Way back. They take this localized historical event and map it onto the entire timeline of the universe. The Exodus isn't just a history lesson, it is a fractal.
A fractal. I love that word for this.
It is the repeating pattern for the entire grand narrative of Scripture.
The biblical authors themselves did not view the Exodus as just one impressive miracle in a list of many. They viewed it as the definitive grammar of God's saving activity.
The core logic.
Exactly. The infographics break this down into a 12-step timeline, demonstrating how this exact pattern of bondage, mediator, blood, and rescue echoes from the beginning of time to the end of time.
Let's trace that fractal because it completely changes how you read the rest of the text. Step 1 on the timeline is eternity.
Right, before time itself.
The point here is that redemption wasn't a panicked reaction to things going wrong. Before Pharaoh, before Egypt, before time itself, there was a divine purpose to cultivate a people.
Which leads directly to step 2, creation.
Where God designs humans to live in unhindered freedom and fellowship, ruling the earth as his representatives.
And that makes the tragedy of step 3, the fall, so catastrophic.
The malware gets installed.
Exactly. Human rebellion introduces a virus into the system. Sin brings spiritual bondage, fear, and ultimate death. And this is a really profound connection the essay makes.
What's that?
Pharaoh is not just a bad politician. He is the ultimate weaponized embodiment of fallen humanity.
Oh, wow.
He is what happens when the virus of human pride is given absolute power and resources. He tries to steal the authority of God and commodify human life, which is exactly what sin does to the human soul.
That is heavy. So step 4 is the covenant with Abraham. Step 5 is the historical redemption we just unpacked, the Exodus event. Step 6 is the kingdom, the arrival at Sinai, the giving of the law, and the establishment of Israel as a nation.
But the story refuses to become a fairy tale at this point.
No, it doesn't end happily ever after.
They get into the promised land and they completely fail the assignment. They do exactly what you warned about earlier. They build a new Egypt.
They embrace idolatry. They oppress their own poor.
They fracture their society. And this leads to step 7, exile. Because they acted like Egyptians, God allows them to be conquered by new empires, Assyria and Babylon.
They are dragged back into foreign slavery.
The physical chains return because the internal allegiance was broken.
But God doesn't abandon the pattern. Step 8 is restoration, driven by the prophets. And the prophets, men like Isaiah and Jeremiah, they don't just vaguely promise that things will get better.
No, they are highly specific.
Right. They specifically reach back and use Exodus vocabulary. They talk about a highway being built in the desert, about water flowing in the wasteland. They are prophesying a new Exodus, a definitive, final rescue operation that will make the rescue from Egypt look like a mere shadow.
And that anticipation sets the stage for step 9, the Messiah. This is the ultimate fulfillment of the fractal.
Walk us through how the New Testament handles this.
When you read the New Testament, the writers are not just telling nice moral stories about Jesus of Nazareth. They are systematically and deliberately mapping the life and death of Jesus directly over the Exodus narrative.
Jesus is presented as the true and greater Moses.
Exactly. And the parallels are staggering once you see them. Moses is born under the threat of Pharaoh's infanticide. Jesus is born under the threat of King Herod's slaughter of the infants in Bethlehem.
Moses goes into the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days to be tested.
But the ultimate parallel is the enemy they face. Jesus isn't fighting a political pharaoh in Rome. He is fighting the ultimate oppressors, sin, death, and the devil.
The physical bondage in Egypt was merely a tangible metaphor for the ultimate spiritual bondage that enslaves all humanity.
Yes.
And the mechanism for this final rescue is exactly the same as the first. Think about John the Baptist. When he first sees Jesus walking toward him, he doesn't announce him by saying, "Behold, a brilliant ethical philosopher."
Uses sacrificial language.
He says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world."
He immediately identifies Jesus as the Passover substitute.
The Apostle Paul makes it explicit in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 7, writing, "Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed."
And during the Last Supper, Jesus takes the traditional elements of the Passover meal, the bread and the wine, elements that for 1,500 years had pointed back to the blood on the doorposts in Egypt.
And he completely recenters the entire narrative on himself. He says, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins."
He is claiming that his impending execution on the Roman cross is the ultimate substitutionary sacrifice. Just as the blood of the Lamb protected the Israelites from the angel of death, the blood of Christ protects humanity from the ultimate judgment of sin.
The cross is the definitive exodus.
The cross is the Exodus.
So, if Jesus is the greater Moses leading the ultimate exodus, how does the early church, and by extension, anyone who claims this faith today, view their own identity?
That brings us to step 10 on the timeline, the church.
The text mentions believers are redeemed with the precious blood of Christ. How does the early church view themselves in this story?
The early church understood themselves entirely as an Exodus-shaped community. Their two primary practices were deeply rooted in this paradigm.
Baptism and communion.
Right. Baptism was understood as passing through the waters of the Red Sea, a physical declaration that you are leaving the old empire of sin behind and being brought safely through the waters of judgment into a new life.
And communion.
Communion, the Eucharist, is the ongoing weekly celebration of the Passover meal, a constant covenant memory of the costly blood that secured their freedom.
Which means they viewed themselves as a pilgrim people. They have been rescued from the kingdom of darkness, but they have not yet arrived at the final destination.
They are wandering in the wilderness, learning to trust the new king.
Step 11 is final judgment, the ultimate vindication where all cosmic evil, the ultimate pharaohs, are thrown into the sea forever.
And finally, step 12, the new creation.
The final destination mapped out in the book of Revelation. And notice, it is not a disembodied existence floating on clouds.
No, it is a renewed physical universe, a new heaven and a new earth, where God dwells directly with his people. Oppression is permanently eradicated.
The system is finally completely restored to its original uncorrupted design.
That is a breathtaking, sweeping theological framework.
It really is. But, a deep dive isn't complete until we pull all of that cosmic theology out of the clouds and apply it directly to the dirt of your daily life.
We have to make it practical.
Exactly, because the ancient mechanics of the Exodus are playing out in your psychology right now. Segment 6 of our analysis focuses on the intense, practical, modern dangers highlighted in the text.
And the central tension here is pretty profound.
What is it?
Leaving the geographical borders of Egypt took one night. Getting the psychological framework of Egypt out of the Israelites took 40 years.
The danger of internal bondage.
It is massive. You could live in a completely free, technologically advanced democratic society and still operate like an absolute slave. You can carry Egypt inside your own chest.
The sources force us to ask a terrifying question. What masters still try to claim you?
Right. Who are you serving?
You aren't mixing mud and straw under a whip. But what drives your anxiety? Are you enslaved to a desperate, unquenchable need for approval from your peers or your industry?
Are you chained to your own greed, terrified that you will never have enough?
Are you trapped in a cycle of bitterness over past trauma, allowing the person who hurt you to operate as a pharaoh over your emotional state?
The biblical warning is that sin is not just a list of broken rules. It is a hostile power. It is bondage.
And this is why discipleship, the actual process of spiritual growth, is not just about evacuation. It requires deep, painful reformation.
You have to actively unlearn the defensive, fearful habits of slavery.
Our sources outline several reductionist traps that modern people fall into, traps designed to shrink the magnitude of this redemption. Let's spend some real time on these traps because they are everywhere.
Sure.
Track number 1, reducing redemption to mere escape.
This is treating salvation purely as a utilitarian relief from bad circumstances. People often approach faith just wanting God to fix their immediate problem.
Get me out of this financial hole, fix my broken marriage, heal this illness.
Exactly. And while God possesses deep compassion for those realities, If you treat him merely as a cosmic get-out-of-jail-free card, you completely miss the point of Sinai.
You miss the call to holiness.
Right. You were just asking for a more comfortable cell in Egypt, not true freedom.
You want the rescue, but you refuse the transfer of allegiance. The second trap is arguably the most dangerous one in our current cultural moment, reducing redemption to mere politics.
Yes.
And I want to push back on this because it sounds controversial. If the whole story of Exodus is about God dismantling a tyrannical political regime that was crushing an ethnic minority, isn't opposing structural oppression the literal mandate? Why wouldn't political revolution be enough?
Opposing structural oppression is an absolute mandate. The prophetic tradition is violently opposed to systems that exploit the poor and vulnerable. God hates systems that crush his image bearers.
What?
But the trap of mere politics is the illusion that the deepest problem with humanity can be solved solely by changing the laws or swapping out the leaders.
Okay, unpack that.
If you overthrow the political Pharaoh, but you do not address the dark, selfish malware embedded in the human heart, history guarantees what will happen next.
The oppressed will simply become the new oppressors.
Precisely. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Right. If there is no fundamental heart change, no surrender to the ultimate authority of a righteous God, political revolution just resets the board for a new game of tyranny.
Regime change without heart change treats the symptom while ignoring the disease.
You cannot legislate away the greed and pride in the human soul.
No, you can't.
Now, the third trap is forgetting the cost, treating grace as cheap and forgetting the blood of the Passover. The fourth is separating redemption from holiness, acting like you can be freed from sin, but still casually participate in it.
These are all ways we try to avoid the cost of real freedom.
But I want to pivot how these truths apply to leadership. Because if you have any authority, whether you are a CEO, a manager, a pastor, or just a parent, the text sets up a stark binary for how you use power.
Pharaoh represents the anti-leader.
The anti-leader.
His leadership is entirely coercive, manipulative, and self-protective. He views human beings as raw commodities, bricks to build his own monuments.
So the standard for healthy, redeemed leadership must be explicitly anti-Pharaoh.
It must be truthful, liberating, and sacrificial. Jesus completely redefines authority, not as the power to subjugate others, but as the willingness to lay down your own life for the good of those under your care.
The redeemed community can never operate on the logic of the empire.
Never. And this brings us to the most intimate application, how we handle suffering and waiting.
For those listening who feel like they are groaning under a weight that won't lift, remember the chronology of the Exodus? 400 years of silence. But the text insists that God's delay is not abandonment.
He hears before he acts.
In that brutal gap between the promise of God and the actual historical fulfillment of it, you have to survive on covenant memory.
You have to trust that the Redeemer sees the tears, knows the pain.
And that the mechanics of rescue are already in motion, even when the sky is completely dark.
Which is the entire purpose of the wilderness. When Israel crossed the Red Sea, God didn't magically teleport them to the lush, fertile valleys of the Promised Land.
He marched them straight into a barren, terrifying desert.
The wilderness is not an accident. It is the classroom of discipleship. Your faith is rarely tested in Egypt, where your dependence on the corrupt system is obvious and the food is guaranteed.
It is tested in the desert, where you are completely stripped of your illusions of control.
You have to transition from Pharaoh's rationing system to God's manna.
In Egypt, you might have been eating the scraps of a slave, but those scraps were predictable. The system functioned.
In the wilderness, you have to wake up every single morning, look at the barren sand, and trust that God is going to literally drop bread from the sky.
It is a grueling, daily retraining of your central nervous system.
You are unlearning the scarcity mindset forged in slavery, and you are painstakingly learning the abundance mindset of living under a king who actually cares for you.
You learn that the word of God sustains you more deeply than the false security of an oppressor.
We have covered massive ground today. We've examined the exact architecture of oppression, the strategic nature of empire, and the profound, bloody mechanics of divine rescue.
We've seen how the Red Sea acts as an uncreation event for the empire, and how the entire ancient narrative maps perfectly onto the ultimate rescue mission of Christ.
When you synthesize all the historical data, the theological frameworks, and the ancient texts we've pulled apart today, it all funnels down to one monumental shift in human identity.
The bottom line of this deep dive is this. You are not owned by Pharaoh. The malware does not have the final say. You have been redeemed by the king.
Out of Egypt. into freedom.
From slavery into sonship, that is the grand trajectory of the universe, and it is the invitation for your own life.
It is the ultimate system restore.
As we close, I want to leave you with one final thought to wrestle with this week. We spent a lot of time talking about the wilderness, that brutal period of waiting and unlearning. Look at your own life right now. Identify the areas where you feel stuck in the sand, where you feel like you've left the old habits behind, but the promised peace hasn't arrived.
Think about your personal wilderness.
It is so easy to view that weight, the daily frustrations, and the terrifying reliance on daily manna as a delay. We think God is holding out on us. But what if it isn't a delay? What if the wilderness is the exact, perfectly designed laboratory where your capacity to actually enjoy ultimate freedom is being built?
If you view it that way, the waiting isn't a punishment. The waiting is the preparation.
You aren't just killing time waiting for the promised land. Your soul is being expanded so that you can actually survive the weight of true freedom when you get there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take a hard look at the systems you trust this week, identify the masters trying to claim your allegiance, and step into the radical, costly freedom you were originally designed for. We'll see you next time.